We have a big treat coming up right now, and I feel somewhat intimidated in trying to introduce I call her our luncheon speaker. Some of you may be saying, but we don't have any lunch in front of us. She is the luncheon speaker, but we wanted her to be able to talk to you in a forum where you could hear what she's saying and not be worried about the tinkle of plates and stuff like this. So this is the beginning of lunch. But I'm going to say one thing up front. This is a very close and personal friend, a mentor, and a role model for me for a number of years. And there's one term I'm going to use once, and then I'm not going to use it again in referring to her, because I think for those of you who know her or people who will read her biography, when you say Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson, you are going to hear the first African-American woman. So I'm saying that, and you can assume that everything I say about her, she has been the first African-American woman to do that, with very, very few exceptions. Now, I am one who says it's not all that great to be the first, unless there are others who follow you. And I think Shirley agrees with me on that, because if you look at the trail that she has blazed, then behind her are other women of color and other people who have done the same kind of things that she has done, but she was the person that broke the glass ceiling or blazed the trail. So I'll try to sit down here pretty quickly. She is a theoretical physicist who has distinguished a career that includes senior leadership positions in academia, government, industry, and research. She holds an SB, for those of you who are not familiar with MIT. She's got a bachelor's of science in physics and a PhD in theoretical elementary particle physics, both from MIT. This is the first time, only time I'm going to say it. She is the first African-American woman to receive a doctorate from MIT in any field, and has been a trailblazer throughout her career, including to lead a top-ranked research university. Among her leadership positions, because I think that's what's important, and I use the term leadership, not management, leadership positions. She was chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the Clinton administration. She was the 18th president of RPI and now president emerita of RPI. She was president of the American Association of the Advancement of Science. And I'm going to read a couple of things here real quickly so that you get just a kind of halfway sense of all that she has done. She helped establish the International Nuclear Regulators Association, serving as its first chair in 1997. 2001, she was the first, she became the, and I will say it again, first African-American, because this is a sore point of mine with the National Academy of Engineering. She was the first African-American woman to be elected to the National Academy of Engineering, where we sit today. And that, to me, is very special. 2009, she was appointed by President Obama to be the president of the Council of, President Obama to the Council of Advisors on Science, PCAS, for those of you who are familiar with it. And then finally, something I think she's very proud of, in 2016, she was awarded the National Medal of Science for work in condensed matter and particle physics, science-rooted public policy achievements, and inspiration to the next generation of STEM professionals, which is what we're all about in this symposium these 2 days. So without further ado, Dr. Jackson.
I will add a slight addendum to what Charlie just said, which is being the first matters, but what you do when you get there matters more. But let me thank you all. And I did not prepare this as a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint, because I wanted to be able to just talk with you a bit. And let me begin this way. Human rights as a topic of focus and concern is broad and complex. That's clear from what we've heard this morning, because it covers a wide range of situations, and it is rooted in norms and expectations, many of which are codified, but not all of which are codified for every situation in national and international laws and treaties. Now, these norms and expectations usually, as we've been talking about, relate to the right to life, overall safety and freedom from harm, freedom of expression, protection against slavery, freedom of religion, and educational access. Now, following the Holocaust of World War II, there was a particular focus in this area. It was articulated, as you know, in the UN Charter and embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. Now, the Declaration actually has 30 articles, where the first 3 of them focus on human dignity, freedom from discrimination, and the right to life, liberty, and personal security. Now, these rights and freedoms in national and international laws cover everything from First Amendment rights in this country to international humanitarian law to international laws on the conduct of war. Now, interestingly, on that last point, over the years, the U.S. military itself has spoken in this area. An example is the articulation of what they call the 5 R's of human rights, promulgated through the U.S. Southern Command: recognize, refrain, react, record, and report. Now, I bring this up because I am a member of the Defense Science Board today, and so I think a lot about these things, particularly having to do with the conduct of war. Now, this particular phraseology came out of a human rights initiative of the U.S. Southern Command as a component of what it then called its Partnership for the Americas, and emanated from a policy put forth in 1990 by General Maxwell Thurman, the then commander of the Southern Command, defining the human rights responsibilities of all U.S. Department of Defense personnel serving in the Southern Command. Now, it also has been and remains, and you've heard a lot of this morning, a big focus in certain academic studies and has appeared in some cases in corporate principles. Now, the point here is that the concepts and importance of human rights have been propagated through many governmental and intergovernmental organizations, both civilian and sometimes military, yet, with the advance of technology, do not cover every situation. So how does this translate to today's forum? Well, first, I ask you the following, or at least ask you to consider the following questions. How many of you have actively and directly advocated for the human rights of others? Great. How many of you have sought legal remedies to correct a human rights violation that you have witnessed? That's great. How many of you have incorporated human rights principles into the work you do? Great. So in this assembly then, and this makes it easier for me, I want to focus on that third question of incorporating human rights principles in the work that you do if you are an engineer, in engineering and science, and if you're not, how it can be incorporated. And there are 5 ways that I would ask you to think about it, and I'm going to talk about things in the context of energy and water security, freedom from harm, and freedom from adverse climate, environmental, and biological effects. The 5 considerations are these. 1, the actual work you do that is structured to benefit humankind. Secondly, advocacy for inclusion in the work you do, for better ideas, and to understand disparate impacts on certain populations. Third, advocacy within engineering and science for appropriate ethical frameworks to govern discovery, design, and implementation. Fourth, keeping designs and discoveries from harming others or disproportionately affecting a given group or community. And 5, taking advantage of an opportunity, if it arises, to have a larger positive impact on a population, a nation, or the world. So let me illustrate with a few examples that weave through these considerations. In thinking about the purposeful direction of one's work, I happened to come across a Nature Q&A article about a Dr. Robert Mukaya. And he is a solid-state chemist in the UK who is provost and deputy vice chancellor at the University of Sheffield. Dr. Mukaya's research focuses on how to manufacture cheaply and efficiently porous carbon materials that can store and catalyze carbon dioxide and hydrogen gases as fuels and help to convert biomass from tropical plants such as Jatropha curcas into biodiesel. Now, Dr. Mukaya does this work to help create energy sources in Africa to address high death rates linked to air pollution from the use of fossil fuels. Now, Dr. Mukaya happens to be the only, not the first, the only identified black chemist in the UK. And in recognition of his research and service to chemistry in 2022, he was awarded the Order of the British Empire, was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in London in 2023, and in 2026 will become the President of the Royal Society of Chemistry. Importantly, in 2008, Dr. Mukaya was a co-founder of the Royal Society of Chemistry Pan-Africa Chemistry Network to increase the number of chemists in sub-Saharan Africa. Between 2016 and 2022, he led the Africa Capacity Building Initiative, funded by the Royal Society and the UK's government's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office to bring together UK and sub-Saharan African institutions and researchers to strengthen Africa's capacity to synthesize porous materials for gas storage, with a focus on field and laboratory practices, and because he was developing researchers writing research papers. And Dr. Mukaya believes, and this is a quote, that anyone engaging in scientific practice shouldn't be excluded. Now, the point of my focusing on Dr. Mukaya is his recognition of the interconnected challenges of energy security and disparate health effects in sub-Saharan Africa. And this kind of conundrum is one that, as an engineer, you could face at any given moment, and particularly if you're dealing with human rights. But I also focus on him because of his use of his technical talent and knowledge and his recognition for his achievement, using those to address these challenges. Now, with respect to the need for and use of ethical guidelines, I earlier mentioned the military example, but let us consider for a moment the rapid advances in biotechnology and the life sciences, and in artificial intelligence, the thing of the day, in particular generative artificial intelligence, and likely soon what is called agentic AI. Now, in advances in both these areas, in the biotechnology sphere and AI, have the potential for addressing the human rights of freedom from disease, of safety, of freedom of expression, but there are risks. And let me talk about a couple. Today, heritable or germline human genome editing is possible. This involves the introduction of genetic changes in sperm, eggs, or embryos that can then be inherited through successive generations emanating from an individual with the altered genome. Now, as far as is known, and I say as is known, no country explicitly allows research inheritable human genome editing, especially in clinical environments. Recently, South Africa modified its health research guidelines in a way that suggests the possibility of such research if there is, and I quote, a clear and compelling scientific and medical rationale focused on preventing serious genetic disorders and on immunity against serious diseases. And that's a quote. And again, that comes from Nature News, a recent article. Now, one can see how South Africa and many sub-Saharan countries would like to address immunity to serious diseases, such as Ebola, but I could give you a total list. Now, this is an important but fraught area of research, because the difficulty is how far is too far in such research. Now, technology and scientific discoveries always exist on a knife edge. And so you've always got to think about this. And researchers in a number of countries, including here in certain areas, operate on the basis of voluntary norms and standards, not always codified in law, and certainly not in international agreements. And so I know that you're thinking about such issues, and so I leave you to ponder them further. And if you'd like to throw a few questions at me, that's fine. Now, I could spend the afternoon talking about the risks of AI and generative AI, the ones people worry about. Among them, deep fakes, myths and disinformation, the use of personal data and AI for social control, or the potential use of AI to create genetically derived or modified pathogens that can be very harmful and relatively uncontrollable. But as you know, there are benefits as well with respect to disease detection. And there's not enough work on this in terms of looking for and at sentinels globally. With respect to then diagnosis, monitoring, and of course mitigation. There's usefulness in terms of agricultural productivity, marrying knowledge in the biosciences with better modeling and data from weather patterns and the like, and to create resistant, drought-resistant, and better disease-resistant crops. Industrial productivity, and so on. And these are important questions because they affect and play into larger human rights issues, because they affect migratory patterns. They affect where people really can live. And so we worry a lot here about our borders. But if we look across the world and across the global south, we've got to think about what is really driving that kind of migratory pattern, and what can we then do with those countries, with communities in those areas that can mitigate some of what they face, because that has a real practical effect on what we face. Now, interestingly, the advent of AI and generative AI and massive energy consuming data centers have led to ever greater demand for new and energy sources, for more of them, including continued fossil fuel use. People thinking about hydrogen batteries and other storage technologies. Of course, small modular reactors, and I used to regulate the nuclear power industry. And the reopening even of mothballed nuclear plants. Now, how many of you have heard about Microsoft's desire to reopen the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant and offtake the energy it produces for a decade? That's a long discussion. But let me just put it to you this way. If those sorts of things occur, This also requires the ramp up not only of nuclear plants, let's just stay with nuclear for a moment, but nuclear fuel fabrication. And that gets us back to questions about extractive industries, chemical processes, etc., as well, as the introduction of other industrial processes. And then questions of how and where to dispose of the inevitable waste products of such activities. And so the challenge, and I would say the opportunity for engineers, encompass considerations such as the following, some of whom you've already heard articulated in different ways this morning. One, how to make fair and equitable decisions on the siting of industrial facilities to avoid disparate impacts on certain communities. You hear about clusters of cancer cases. You have things like Bhopal. Most people haven't thought about the plant that caused a problem in Institute, West Virginia, in this country. A second, how to better control harmful effluents from industrial processes. How to apply appropriate effort to testing and detecting harmful byproducts. But importantly, how to design facilities to avoid harmful byproducts or releases in the first place. Are there approaches to extractive processes that are less harmful? Can we, in fact, automate them more with better technology so we don't, and this means globally, one is not putting young people or any people at risk in terms of how that's done. And in the case of algorithmically driven advances, I've spoken of AI, is there a way, and this is for the, computer scientists and computer engineers, how do we design the structure and architecture of algorithms in the first place, such as to have more personal protections built in, to have better inherent detection and deflection of mis- and disinformation and malicious use, and to require less energy consumption? Why do I bring that up? The energy consumption is what drives people to want to reopen old plants. This whole question about detection and deflection, I always challenge and ask my folks in these areas, isn't there a model we can think about that is biomimetically derived, having to do with detection of certain kinds of anomalies, and therefore a response in terms of the architecture of what happens? So I would ask you to ponder these questions and ones like it, during your deliberations. And so if you'll allow me a moment of indulgence, I'm going to close with two examples from my own career. Now, I've had the opportunity and blessing to contribute to science and technology and its role in advancing our economy, our national security, and global security, and as well as in industry, government, and academia, as you've heard. And so in this way, I've had the opportunity to address human rights from the perspective of safety, security, and even the very right to life on a global scale. Now, I believe strongly that for each of us, windows in time can open. And if one is prepared to step through them, one's life can change, and one can have a unique opportunity to do something significant. It could be large, it could be smaller, but one has to be willing to step through the window. Now, I'm very proud to have served as chairman of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, which, as you may know, licenses, regulates, and safeguards. Safeguards meaning looking at, non-proliferation issues, and safeguards the use of nuclear reactors and nuclear materials, nuclear fuel fabrication and use, as well as the exports of civilian nuclear technology and the disposition of nuclear waste from primarily commercial activities, including spent nuclear fuel. Now, the NRC also happens to do safety reviews of nuclear reactors placed in U.S. Navy ships, and that has an impact on the degree to which certain countries are willing to have those ships come into their ports. Now, in my role at the NRC and others, I've always worked to strengthen the safety and the civilian use of nuclear power and to strengthen nuclear nonproliferation around the globe. And my tenure as the chairman of the U.S. NRC occurred not long after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the window in time. And so I became a member of what was then called the U.S.-Russian Federation Binational Commission on Scientific and Economic Cooperation that was led by Vice President Al Gore on the U.S. side and Vice President Viktor Chernomyrdin on the Russian side. Now, it was an interesting experience. We met every 6 months formally. There was a lot of work that went on in between. And we met in the winter here and in the summer in Russia. I could tell you more about the kinds of planes we flew on, but that's for another day. And under the aegis of what was then called the Gore-Chernomyrdin Commission, the NRC was part of an effort to secure the weapons-grade uranium of the nuclear programs across the countries of the former Soviet Union, the then so-called newly independent states. And under my leadership, the NRC worked alongside the U.S. Department of Energy to implement a materials control, protection, and accounting framework for nuclear materials to track the movement and disposition of that nuclear material that had been in those places. Now, this also meant helping the newly independent states to properly store spent nuclear fuel from Soviet-designed reactors. And so the NRC also licensed the fabrication of nuclear fuel from blended down high-enriched uranium sent to the U.S. from Russia to be used in U.S. commercial power reactors. And this was under an agreement between the U.S. and Russia. And this was part of what was called the Megatons to Megawatts program, a government-industry partnership involving the then U.S. Enrichment Corporation, now Centrus Energy and Tenex of Russia, to bring to the U.S. 500 metric tons of blended down weapons-grade uranium from dismantled Russian nuclear warheads to fabricate into fuel for nuclear reactors. And the program lasted for a decade until December 2013. Now, we also worked with those newly independent states to update and frankly reconstruct the design basis of the Soviet-era plants, in particular the RBMK reactors of the designs that blew up, of the design that blew up in the Chernobyl accident. And we helped then to reconstruct that design basis and do probabilistic and other risk assessments to make changes, to make them safer. And we also ended up helping to write nuclear regulations and train nuclear inspectors. But my tenure also coincided with the end of apartheid in South Africa. And so you had a government come into being, many of whom were people, some of whom had been in exile or been imprisoned, and they inherited a nuclear program. South Africa had given up its weapons program, but the actual whole complex was still controlled by Afrikaners. And so we worked with President Nelson Mandela's government on the development of a policy and programmatic framework for nuclear safety. And we also did inspector training. You've heard about my pushing to form the International Nuclear Regulators Association to have this focus on safety and working with countries like these to be more global. And we succeeded, and in the end, we had the chief nuclear regulators from Canada, France, Germany, Japan, Spain, Sweden, the UK, and the US be part of that group, and I was elected the first chairman of the group for 2 years during my tenure as chairman. Interestingly enough, the group continues today, and South Africa has been added as a member. We also pushed for an international convention on nuclear safety, and that came out of the US, came out of the NRC. But we were the last country to ratify it. But we did. But it continues in force today. But, you know, my work there seems particularly pertinent at this moment with what the war in Ukraine and what has happened at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which is the largest in Europe, in terms of the staffing, in terms of shelling, in terms of the fact that a plant like that needs an external source of water. And right now they're using cooling ponds. And so this is an issue that ultimately affects the safety of millions of people, as well as what is going on in the actual fighting. But finally, you know, I had the chance to be the president of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for 23 years. And Rensselaer is the oldest private technological university in the United States. And it has had a history of educating those who've made great differences, particularly in our infrastructure and so on. And so when I was there, I wanted to help reposition the university and have it focus in areas of engineering and science that I felt were fundamental to the 21st century and had effect not just in this country, but globally. And so we focused in computational science and engineering, biotechnology, and the life sciences, in advanced materials, importantly in energy, the environment, and smart systems, as well as in media, arts, science, and technology. And over the years that I was there, we changed how we teach our students, so they aren't just nailed to the seats, what we teach them, as well as new pathways through the university. And I'll end with this because it speaks to what was talked about in the last panel. And so we created something called the Arch. Now, you know, engineering programs, many of them are 5 years. Co-op programs can take 4.5, 5 years. And at the same time, one is playing against a tension about cost of higher education and how long students are in school. So I actually came up with the idea of something that we ultimately call the Arch. And what the Arch does, it accelerates the junior year into the summer after the sophomore year. Now, it's asking a lot of the students because they do a full semester's courses in that summer, but, you know, these are RPI students. And what that does is, and then they have to go away, either in the fall of the normal junior year or the spring. And of course, if they go in the fall, it's a longer time than a typical summer experience. But if they go in the spring, they have a long time. It's at least about 8 or 9 months. And then they come back after that and finish their junior year and graduate in the usual time. The point is that we wanted the students to go away, and they have to go away. Now, many of our faculty wanted the students to stay on the campus and work with them. But our point is that the students have to go away. So some of them would go and work in companies. Some would do startups. But many, we wanted them to go abroad and to work on real-world problems. And I had articulated early in my tenure that we wanted our students to have intellectual agility, so they wouldn't just be, they were competent in their disciplines, but they had to work across disciplines on important problems. Multicultural sophistication, and there's some mixing on the campuses, but you'd be surprised at how much doesn't occur on the campuses. And so you get multicultural sophistication by going somewhere else and seeing how other people really live. and a global view. And those were the three key elements. And interestingly enough, you know, even though I've been retired for 2 years, well, I'm a meriter, so I go back around every now and then. The one thing the board insisted be kept was the arch. And so I view that as a big achievement. And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is my message about what one can do. And it's important if one has the opportunity to be in a significant leadership position to do something. You heard some very compelling stories about how various professors and those in the universities are doing amazing things to broaden the perspectives of their students. But it takes the leadership of the university to change it was the whole academic schedule to open the aperture for students to be able to really do important things. And that's what a president can do. And that's what I did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jackson. And I did not ask her. I'm not sure how long she's going to be with us. Okay, grab her. And because we were not able to have a Q&A session here because you all are going to complain about not getting enough time to eat. So are we going back into the reception room, the area? Okay, so lunch will be had across the hall in the reception area. And just try to be back about 10 minutes to 12:50 as opposed to the 12:45 that's on the schedule there. Get a bite to eat and then come back. This afternoon will be really, really, really interesting, I think, because we're also going to try to do a case study toward the end of the day. So thank you very much.